In today's video, we're going to be going over how to do this super insane spin collage effect. The first thing I want to do is give a big shout out to Inspired Island. I saw this in one of his music videos and decided to put it in my own way. Now, the first thing you want to do is open up Photoshop or any photo editing software. Most photo editing softwares can do what we're about to do here. The first thing you're going to do is grab the images that you want to be in the collage. I did this with DC2 Trill. I found a couple of images from the internet, and I'll just sort of show you the workflow that you need in order to do this. You're going to drag in an image here. This image might seem a little bit low quality, but for the effect, this really doesn't matter too much. And then on the left side for Photoshop users, you can click the object quick selection tool and then quick select your subject just by clicking and hovering over what you want highlighted. And anything you don't want, you can just hold Alt and remove it. Another important thing is these don't necessarily have to be perfect. Just try to get it as close as you want. After you're done, click on select and mask, go to the feather and just turn up the feather a bit. Don't overdo it because then you'll get like this. Just turn it up a little bit to just soften the edges. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to smoothen it a little bit. Click OK and then press Ctrl C and then Ctrl J. And what you'll have when you paste is essentially the layer without the background. You can use the sort of auto remove background tool, but depending on the photos that you take, it might not work. So generally I would just recommend just doing the selection. You have way more control. I also have to fix the selection a little bit here. Once you have the subject done, you can export it as a PNG. This is why I said you could do this in basically any photo editing software. As long as you can remove the background from the photo and export this as a PNG, it should be fine. You can rotoscope the photos inside of After Effects, but if you're like me and you might have lower res quality photos, you might find that it's a little bit more painful to do. That's why generally I would just recommend doing all of your photos inside of Photoshop or any kind of photo editing software first and then exporting out. The other thing that you can do to add on to it as well while you're inside of whatever photo editing software you're using is give this image a little bit more texture, which I think will help sell the effect more. I'm going to use Brian Delimata's paper textures. If you're interested in using these textures, I'll have them linked down below, and you can also use my code to get a discount. But you can use literally any form of paper texture. It really doesn't matter. Just trying to give the image a little bit more texture. Photoshop makes it very easy because all I have to do is drag the texture over top, right click, and then create clipping mask, and then go from change the blending mode to screen. And then as you can see, it gives a more paper texture look. One thing I would also do sometimes, depending on the image, is create an adjustment layer that's brightness and contrast and play around with the contrast a bit, because sometimes depending on the textures you use, it gets washed out a bit, so you just have to bring it back a little bit. And if you feel like your paper texture or scratches are just a bit too extreme, what you can also do is go to the opacity and then just turn down that opacity a little bit, so that way those textures just aren't as harsh. But as you can see here, it gives it a little bit more of like a paper texture sticker vibe, which I think will help in the edit in the end. So then you can just sort of export as, and I would just recommend exporting this PNG, all of your PNGs, into a photo. Once you have all of the photos that you want to use fully exported as PNGs, then you can hop into After Effects. Once you're inside of After Effects, you're going to select new composition. You can make the duration and length whatever you want. Usually I wouldn't make this effect any longer than 3 seconds. It should happen pretty quick in my opinion. And then I would also put the frame rate to 24. Click OK. Once your project is open, the next thing you want to do is create a new solid, and then you can make this essentially your background color. You can make it whatever color you want. I'm going to make it red. The next thing you want to do is grab your shape tool and go to specifically the ellipse tool, hold shift and then click, and then essentially you'll make a completely proportional circle. This does not have to be that big, just make it big enough. Again, this will be experimentation, play around with it. Once the circle is created, on your right side you should have a tab labeled align. If you don't have it, you can also go into window and select align so it appears, and with the shape layer selected, just click align layers to align horizontally center and align vertically center, so that way the shape is perfectly aligned. Once the shape is perfectly aligned, you're going to right click the shape and then you're going to pre-compose the shape layer. Once you go inside the pre-composition, you'll see that it's all black, and all you want to do is enable transparency, which is this right here, this little icon right here at the bottom. Click on it and now you should see this transparent layer and then the circle. The next thing I would do to give the image a little bit more depth is right click, go to layer styles and use bevel and emboss. Again, this is just preference, you can play around with it, but the things that I would play around with are the depth, the size, and the soften of the circle, and just play around with it until you get what you like. And when you go back in the pre-comp, you see that there's that little depth right there with that little bevel edge. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm inside of this composition is click R on my keyboard, which will open the rotation tab, turn on the keyframe, go 1 over, and I'm just going to put 1, which means it'll go 1 rotation or 360 degrees. Again, depending on the amount of images you have and the duration that you have this go for, you might just want to go for longer, but that works fine for me. You're going to select both keyframes, right click them, go to keyframe assistant, and then click easy ease. Then you're going to select both keyframes again, and then you're going to click on this, the graph editor. If you don't see this graph, right click and make sure that you're on speed graph and not value graph. You're going to click on this right keyframe, hold shift, and then drag this bar out, trying to keep the line the same. And then essentially what this does is it gives a quick little speed ramp at the beginning and then it slows down at the end. This is optional, you don't necessarily need this, but I think it adds to it a lot more. You can also play around with it to start off slow and speed up at the end. You would just flip this graph essentially. Now we're going to import our images, and all you have to do is go back into this composition, grab the image that you want to use, and then drag it in, making sure that it's over top of the circle. You want to scale it down to fit inside of the circle, and also rotate it a bit so that way it can fit inside the circle. You can fit these in however you think best fits, but what I'm going to do is always have an image at the bottom of the circle and then have an image just completely on the opposite side of the circle. I think that's the easiest way to do it, but again, you can play around with this, figure out what works best for you. Once you have an image sort of positioned where you want it to be, the next thing you want to do is click on the mask tool again, and with the image selected, you're going to draw another circle over your subject, and then just deselect it real quick and then reselect again, and then essentially you can just sort of manipulate this mask. And what you want to do is take this mask and essentially try to move it to align with the curves of the circle, so that way it's a little bit more smoother. And then you're going to grab the mask tool and then you're going to feather. As you can see, it'll slip out of the circle with the feather. So if you ever see that but you like where the feather is, all you have to do is just bring your mask up a bit so that way the feather doesn't go outside of the circle, because I think that ruins the effect. But it's just trial and error, just play around with it until it fits perfectly. Once you have that image, you can drag in your next, and essentially you're just going to do the same thing for the rest of the images. And then essentially what you just want to do is just play around with the timing for when certain ones appear. You can also go back out to this composition for reference to see where things are positioned, just to make sure that things are in the right spot. I'm going to come back once I have all of my images imported and positioned. As you guys can see, I finally figured out the timing and the positioning that I want for my images. Now that that's done, I essentially grabbed the background layer, the solid, and then I pre-composed it. And essentially inside of this pre-comp, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add texture to the background. And the way that I'm going to do this is by using another texture from from a place called Black Market that has copy scan textures. You don't have to use this. You could use literally any texture, but I'm just using this. You're gonna right click on the texture, go to blending mode, change the blending mode to screen. Then what I would do is click T on my keyboard to turn down the opacity a slight bit. And then on the pre-comp, I would get Lumetri color and place it on. And because it's a little bit washed out again, we're just going to bring it back in by playing around with the curves to sort of drag down the shadow texture a little bit. And I'm going to push this up a little bit to still have the texture. I'm also going to, inside of basic correction, bring up the saturation again. Now that that's done, I'm going to grab both of these and then pre-compose them again. Then inside of this pre-composition, I'm going to grab posterize time and then change the frame rate from 24 to 12. And then it gives that more texture animated look. And the last thing I'm going to do to add more to it, press S to activate the scale in a slight bit, and then have it scale back out to 100. Select both of those keyframes, easy them. With both keyframes selected, go into the graph editor again, hold shift, and then drag this bar out, trying to stay on the line again. But as you can see here, it's a little jump out. And just like that, you have this super insane animated spin collage transition. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe for more. Bye.